Welcome back. You're still watching Politics Tonight, digging beyond the headlines. And now to our interview with the guest of the day. I am joined by the Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Cowrie Asset Management Limited, Johnson Chukwu, for discussion on debt overhang amid dwindling revenue in Nigeria. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, sir.
Thank you for having me. Good evening.
Good evening to you. The inauguration of a new president in Nigeria is less than 3 days away. How is the economic outlook responding to this?
Well, in terms of economic outlook, most economic operators are still on the sideline watching to see how things play out, the policies of the incoming government, the quality of the appointees, the economic directions. Basically, what I would say is that economic operators are still holding their breath to make judgment calls on which direction and where the opportunity will come and how the incoming government will manage the affairs and the difficult economic conditions of the country.
So how ready is the business community to work with the incoming president for economic prosperity in Nigeria?
Well, that's why I say that the business community is waiting for direction. Hopefully, we'll begin to get that direction early next week. So it all is a matter of incentives and opportunities that will be explored and exploited by business operators, as well as the fact that business operators are looking for improvement in the economic environment. They're looking for improvement in the policy environment. They're looking for specific focus area or focal area of the government and areas where the government want to channel resources to. So the basic thing we have to recognize is that businesses go to where there are more opportunities and lesser risk. So they are looking for the de-risking of the Nigerian economic environment or business environment, and they are looking for the policies that will define the economic orientations of the economic orientation of the government.
So, Mr. Chukwu, what would you consider the most pressing economic challenge that the incoming president must tackle?
Well, to say most simply means you're looking at one item. I would say there are multiplicity of economic issues that that need to be addressed in the country. In your introduction, you had mentioned the issue of debt. Second to that is the issue of revenue. And then you have to look at the policies of the government that will make or improve the ease of doing business in the country and make Nigeria more competitive. Then you have to look at the issue of improving infrastructural supply in the country, power supply in particular, the other energy sources, and then logistic infrastructure and transport infrastructure. There are multiplicity of areas or challenges that the government has to face in order to reposition the country and make this country a destination for investors.
All right, so, amidst revenue shortfall, national debt continues to rise. But what measures can the next president take to address this debt overhang?
Well, one of the things I have advocated repeatedly and different fora is that the government must recognize that it does not have the financial resources to continue to build infrastructure from budgetary allocations. And if you just look at what happened last year, 2022, by November 2022, the government has spent about 12.8 trillion naira as total expenditure of the federal government by November. Of that amount, the government had only raised 6.5 trillion naira as revenue. Of the 12.8 trillion naira the government spent, only 1.88 trillion naira was on infrastructure, which meant that the entire money that was spent on infrastructure was borrowed, because if you consider the government only raised 6.5 trillion naira, out of that 6.5 trillion, he spent 5.24 trillion naira for debt service and borrowed and spent 5 trillion naira as non-debt recorded expenditure. So it's also borrowed at around 1.8 trillion naira that was spent on infrastructure. And we all agree that the government is not the most efficient user of economic resources. Government is not the most efficient executor of private sector driven projects or the project that the private sector can better manage. If you just look at some of the key infrastructure the government has been battling to conclude, look at the Lagos-Ibadan Express Road. It's been in the works for close to 20 years. Look at the second Niger Bridge, how long it has taken to complete it if it has been fully completed. So, but consider if these projects were handled by the private sector. The private sector would have spent less and completed the projects quicker. So in terms of getting value for money, the private sector clearly perform better than the government. And so that means that any project that can be executed by the private sector is willing to invest in, the government should hands off from such projects and allow private sector to invest in it, because we cannot continue to borrow to build the infrastructure. That's one aspect. The other aspect is that there are expenditures of the government that are not absolutely necessary. You have to look at it is whether it is necessary and what kind of social value does it have, what kind of social impact and types of as well as economic impact some of these expenditures have. We have debated repeatedly the issue of subsidy on petroleum products, and we're saying that the social impact of the subsidy on petroleum products is less than the economic cost, as well as the long-term social cost, because the what we call the alternative that these monies would have been put into would have had more social impact, like in education, healthcare, road infrastructure, and other critical government investments. So the key thing is that the government must prioritize or reprioritize its expenditure and focus on those items that have more impactful social and economic benefit, other than subsidies that have no long-term economic impact or social impact. As well as government must share away from borrowing to build infrastructure, particularly commercial infrastructure, where the private sector can take it up and build it more efficiently.
All right, so because you've talked about how unnecessary some of those borrowings are, how can the federal government reduce its reliance on foreign loans and grants?
Well, in the first place, the federal government must not just reduce its reliance on foreign loans. The key thing is the government must grow its revenue and then put a lid on its expenditure.
Mr. Johnson Chukwu. All right, tonight I've been speaking with the Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Cowrie Assets. Right. Just go ahead.
Okay, at that point, the government generated about 3.2 trillion naira, leaving just about a deficit about 1.6 trillion. Budget revenue was about 3.2 trillion naira in 2015, and the expenditure was 4.8 trillion naira. Just fast forward 8 years down the line, the government expenditures at November last year had grown from 4.8 trillion naira to 12.8 trillion naira. That's about 300% growth. But revenue had only grown from 3.2 trillion naira to 6.5 trillion naira, barely 100% growth. So the government is growing its expenditure faster than it's growing its revenue. So government must put a lid on the rate at which it's growing revenue. And that is what is leading to the continuous borrowing. 2015, total federal government debt was 12.6 trillion naira. By the end of last year, if you add the ways and means, because we had about 46 trillion national debt, if you add the ways and means, we're about 70 trillion naira. Total from a 12.6 trillion naira national debt to about 70 trillion naira of national debt, because we are spending more than we're generating, and we keep ballooning the government deficit. So the government must cut down its expenditure. Even if you look at recorded expenditure, the recorded expenditure in 2015 was just about 1.9 trillion naira. By November last year, 2022, it had grown to about 5 trillion naira. That's more than 250% growth. So key challenge is that we're growing expenditure faster than we're growing revenue, and that's why we're borrowing more. And that's also why we're ballooning our debt service from about 1 trillion naira in 2015 to about 5.24 trillion naira at the end of November last year.
So President Buhari is seeking payment of more than 500 billion naira in judgment debt just a few days before he leaves office. Do you think this is right?
Well, the question of right or wrong is not the issue. The issue is that certain things that are not urgent, though they may be important, can be delayed for the next government to review it. I wouldn't know whether even the National Assembly has approved that request, but ordinarily, I do not think it's such an urgent payment that must be done within the next few days. So what I would have expected is that the government, with the outgoing government, should allow the incoming government to review that judgment debt and possibly further negotiate with the claimant and then before making such payment. I don't think it's something that must be done in a few days' time.
All right. So, I mean, it's less than 3 days to the inauguration of a new government. So what are your expectations of the incoming administration of Bola Tinubu? And for you, has it got all it takes to rescue our country?
Well, they say the taste of the pudding is the eating. We all wait and see what happens post May 29, 2022. But like I've already mentioned some of the key areas of focus of anybody who wants to govern the country. We must close the infrastructural gap, particularly energy infrastructure. You must deal with the issue of logistics supply, the seaports and the airports as export terminals and import terminals. You must deal with the issue of government revenue, and you must deal with the issue of government expenditure.
So let's talk about Nigeria's debt to revenue ratio. How worried are you about it?
Well, it's actually very worrisome because if you look at the actual figure that were published by the Ministry of Finance in November last year, I mean, by the Minister of Finance, when she presented the performance of the budget, the breakdown of 2023 budget and performance of 2022 budget, she said that government had generated revenue of 6.5 trillion naira by November, and government has spent 5.24 trillion naira for debt service. That amounted to 80% debt service to revenue as at November. Of course, the World Bank IMF saying that this has gone to as high as 96% or thereabouts. So we are actually in a difficult financial situation where debt service is consuming almost 100% of our revenue, which leaves government with minimal headroom for investment in critical infrastructure and other infrastructure.
So, I mean, in the last 15 minutes, you've really buttressed on revenue generation. But what strategies do you think the president-elect should use to diversify the economy for increased revenue generation?
I think the key thing any president of the country should do is to focus on productivity. What are those things you need to do to improve productivity in the country? I had touched on the infrastructural gap. The other issue is the issue of policy, the issue of strategic focus on sectors of the economy where Nigeria has competitive advantage. And I always say that, look, Nigeria's economy boasts a lot of opportunities. The challenge we've had is that we've not really focused on the right policy, created the right policy and the right environment to explore those opportunities. Take, for instance, the issue of telecommunication sector. The sector that did not account for any share of the GDP has begun to account for more than 60% of the GDP, just because we came up with the right policies and assiduously implemented those policies. We can replicate that in several sectors of the economy. So the issues are, do we have the right focus? Agriculture, we've talked a lot about agriculture for the past couple of years. We still have agriculture as a subsistent means of livelihood instead of commercial agriculture. Our yield per hectare of cultivated land is still far below the best in the world. And so these are areas, issue of irrigation to improve agricultural production, issue of improving the quality of education so as to create the caliber of labor that we can export high quality goods or value-added goods. A lot of things need to be done. The key thing in the country about the country's economy is that there is actually no sector that has matured, there's no sector that has fully developed, and each sector sees both opportunities if the right policies are put in place to induce investment and economic growth.
So earlier you talked about ease of doing business, but how much more do you think the incoming government should improve on this?
A lot, a lot. I mean, if you just catch your mind back about 4 years ago or thereabouts, about 4 or 5 years ago, the then government of President Muhammadu Buhari, under the then Minister of Trade and Investment, came up with visa on arrival policy, and that had a material impact on Nigeria's ease of doing business. We've seen improvements in areas like title registration for properties in some states. In some instances, we've seen improvement in tax payment. So you need to have this implement across board, particularly in areas as it relates to security of life and property, issues around adjudication of commercial cases, or quick dispensation of legal conflicts or commercial conflicts. At some point, we say we're going to create commercial courts that could expeditiously give judgments on commercial cases. I don't think that is quite working quite well, apart from one or two states, maybe Lagos State and maybe one or two other states. So we need to look at the entire gamut of activities that affect the confidence of investors to come to any economy. We need to look at our FX policies, foreign exchange policies. We look at the way we're managing our macroeconomic environment, interest rate management, exchange rate management. So these are factors that will either encourage investors to come into the economy or scare away investors. And the reality of the situation is that the government, we don't have enough resources, economic resources in the country to grow this economy at the rate we should grow. So we need foreign direct investment. So we need to make Nigeria a natural destination for foreign direct investment. We have one of the biggest markets. We have the biggest market in Africa and one of the biggest markets in the world in terms of market potential. With a 200 million population, about the 6th most populated country in the world. So ordinarily, we should be a natural destination for manufacturing industries. But we need to create the enabling environment for investors to consider us as the best, their first choice of for investment.
All right, so talking about commercial cases and the need to have a commercial court, how much of a challenge is this to Nigeria?
It is. For those of us who are in private sector businesses, it's been a nightmare dealing with the legal system or the court system. I can tell you for one that I've had a commercial case that's been in court since 2011. It's not yet been resolved. On 3 occasions, the judge went on what we call the political election tribunal assignment, and after that, they go on vacation and other things. So if you have a commercial case involving maybe $1 million, for instance, $1 million, which is about 180 million naira then, and today, if you even get a judgment today, and you are paid 118 million naira, you've just been paid less than 10% of the value that you parted with. So in any case, if you are a foreign investor and you go through that process, assuming I was coming from outside the country to come for those cases, and I have flown to the country 20, 50 times, and then the judgment has not been given, and then when the judgment is given, I get 10% of what was the case involved, what the amount involved. What do you think would be my feeling about that country? So even in legal time, they say justice delayed is justice denied. And then you have tons of adjustments in commercial cases. And because in the commercial realm, they say time is money. That's what we call time value of money. That is saying that the naira today is more valuable than the naira tomorrow. Because the naira today will earn income if it's invested. And the purchasing power of naira today will be higher than the purchasing power of naira tomorrow, because naira will depreciate as a result of the value of naira will depreciate as a result of inflation. But so if you do not expeditiously deal with commercial cases, you make investors that are involved, particularly those whose assets or values are withheld by another party, to lose value in the long run.
All right, I've been speaking with the Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Kari Assets Investment Management Limited, Johnson Chukwu. Tonight, we're discussing debt overhang amid dwindling revenue in Nigeria.